research and development on psychological interventions in ADHD has gained quite a bit of momentum since the 2000s. What we want to do in this lesson is to sketch out the main conclusions and also to plan some of the work that's ahead of us, because there's quite a bit of work still to do in terms of psychological interventions. And so the first thing that we will want to outline is the types of intervention that exist concerning ADHD. Then we want to focus on the goals of these interventions and how personal goals can be established for any individual or his or her family. Then we also want to address the types, so the modalities of intervention that are going to be used. Now, a key point here is that symptoms, so diagnostic symptoms, and associated problems interact. So let's keep that in mind when we assess the effect of the different types of interventions. So let's start by distinguishing the types of intervention. We will like to distinguish psychoeducative interventions from psychotherapeutic interventions. Psychoeducation is about educating, so it's about giving information to the individual, to the family, so that they may understand the mechanisms and types of processes that are involved in ADHD. Psychotherapeutic interventions can be individualized, so individual psychotherapy, or group psychotherapy. Both will help in personalizing the types of perhaps problems, challenges, difficulties, but also solutions, working through, as well as troubleshooting, imagining different types of scenarios and trying to implement them. And when one tries to implement the kind of things that are learned in psychotherapy, one can use either family or situational interventions, so interventions in the field, in the daily lives of individuals. And this is going really to help to generalize what is learned in both psychoeducation and psychotherapy to the actual daily life of the individual. So let's now focus a bit more on psychoeducation. So psychoeducation has a history, it's relatively young. So in the 1970s, psychoeducation was conceptualized to really help children with psychiatric problems to understand better what their problems were about, what the diagnoses they had were about, how it functioned, and how it influenced their learning patterns. So how it had an impact at school. So the idea there was really to educate the children to kind of watch out for the kind of impact that this may have within their learning environment. And interestingly enough, in the 70s, 80s, this type of intervention, psychoeducative intervention, was used with adults that had a diagnosis of psychosis or schizophrenia. Their families were also involved to learn more about what schizophrenia is, what psychosis is, and how it functions, what we know about the problem, how we may think about the kind of impact this has in the family or in the individual's life. So as time went on, in the 90s, psychoeducation was generalized to many types of disorders to really give information to both the patients, so the individuals with the diagnosis, but also their families, partners, social environment, so that everybody had shared knowledge about the types of difficulties that may arise with these problems. Starting now the early 2000s, psychoeducation was built into the recovery model approach, where the idea is really to kind of empower, to give information as tools that individuals can use to really understand what is going on with themselves and try to find individualized solutions in the different contexts that these challenges may appear and occur in their lives. So if we summarize, we can identify at least 5 functions, 5 goals of psychoeducation. The first being giving out information. So really sharing information that can be learned, that can be analyzed by individual, and that can be used appropriately. The second is interesting. The second goal is around clarifying identity. Because you may imagine that when one receives a diagnosis, there's the issue of what do I have versus what am I? So this whole process of identity formation, of how one integrates characteristics of a disorder into one's identity, is a process. And this type of information can help with the process of honing, of taking in the information that is relevant to oneself. The third goal is really about empowerment and agency. The idea is that with key information, one can really take the responsibility to perhaps act, to think, act, eventually change some patterns, which actually constitute the fourth goal. So the fourth goal is around changing one's attitudes towards its difficulties and also changing behavior. Okay, so the whole idea, as you can see, is that through psychoeducation, one learns, processes, integrates, and then is perhaps able to imagine some change. And finally, the whole psychoeducative process is to increase literacy in mental health. What does that mean exactly? Well, literacy is about having access to information, being able to analyze, criticize information, select information, use information to help oneself deal with the challenges that are brought about with specific disorders. So to conclude, psychoeducation is about giving out information that is relevant to the psychological processes involved in ADHD. The availability of this information, the understanding of this information is likely to be integrated by the individual, used by the individual to find solutions to the different challenges that pop up in personal life, professional life, school life. So psychoeducation is one of the key psychological interventions that is usually used right after the diagnostic and evaluation procedure in ADHD.